November 13th, 1968, firing line, promo.
This week on Firing Line, my guest is Mr. Eldridge Cleaver, and the subject for discussion is the Black Panther movement. Please tune in if you can.
November 13th, 1968, firing line, Cleaver.
I'm Lawrence Chickering, and I will serve as chairman of this discussion between Mr. Buckley and Mr. Eldridge Cleaver. The topic of tonight's discussion is the Black Panther movement. Mr. Buckley will introduce his guest.
Eldridge Cleaver is the information minister of the Black Panthers and presidential candidate a while ago on the Peace and Freedom Party. Mr. Cleaver is extremely popular among the extremely dissatisfied in America, and although he makes much of the fact of his blackness, in fact he has apparently much more support among dissatisfied American whites than blacks. And no doubt Mr. Cleaver will in due course explain why this should be so. He grew up in Arizona and California. In due course and after much deliberation, he chose criminal vocations, first as a trader in marijuana, for which he was arrested and served time as a juvenile delinquent, and then, when he was a little older, as a rapist, specializing in white victims. He was caught and sent to jail on a 14-year sentence, of which he has served 9 years before getting bail. While in jail, he educated himself and wrote the bestseller Soul on Ice, which is a catechism of sorts on Mr. Cleaver's personal ideology, which he defends most militantly as a Black Panther outspokenly engaged in revolutionary activity, the purpose of which is to change the face of America. I should like to begin by asking Mr. Cleaver whether he finds it consistent with his ideology to encourage the assassination of Mr. Richard Nixon. I mean, he is the chief pig, isn't he?
Richard Nixon is, at this moment, the pig waiting in the wings to take the place of the other pig that's on his way out. I would say that if Richard Nixon was assassinated, it would only result in having another pig in line who possibly would need to be assassinated. If anyone wanted to assassinate Richard Nixon, I wouldn't do anything to stop him. Not on camera, but maybe behind closed doors where I wouldn't be prosecuted for it. Perhaps I would encourage that. I don't see any reason for having Richard Nixon alive today.
Now, that being your point of view, does it sometimes surprise you that that you are given your liberty? I mean, granted, you've been in jail a whole lot, but does it surprise you that you should be out of jail at all, especially when you consider this country doesn't?
It doesn't surprise me at all that I should be out of jail because I was sent to jail, I was convicted and sentenced to jail, and I served my time. And that's what the law requires. So I'm out, and I don't see any reason why I should be back.
Well, but you have described ours as an unjust society, which has no respect at all for the rights of its enemies, and you have just said that you would perhaps be grateful to anybody who assassinated the President of the United States. Now, under the circumstances, aren't you surprised that a society permits you to say that, especially one which you say is unjust?
Well, this society permits a lot of people to say all kinds of things, you see. So I'm not surprised about that.
Well, but maybe nothing at all surprises you about our society. Is that the idea?
There are a few things that surprise me. There are a few people in this country who show an undue, I should say, great courage and a great ability to struggle against what seems to be overwhelming odds. And this surprises me that people have the courage to confront this criminal society and then move to destroy it.
Mm-hmm. Well, would you be surprised if the society showed enough courage to lock you up and keep you locked up for so long as you were, in effect, encouraging the assassination of its public officials?
In the first place, you see, you're the one that posed the question in that particular manner, and I was just responding to that. But later for this society, later for its ability to lock me up, it's been trying to reincarcerate me ever since I've been out. They didn't let me out because they wanted to. They let me out because a lot of pressure was brought to bear, and at that time, they thought it would be the best thing to do. Since I've been out and gotten involved in the movement, they've been trying to put me back in jail, so that I'm not surprised at anything that they do.
All right, well, let's subtract the question of what surprises you and what doesn't, since it seems to be an unprofitable line of inquiry.
Definitely.
But let me say that I'm surprised, that you should be surprised that I should bring these subjects up, because it isn't every day that you have a guest on your program who says such things as you say and reiterate. You're quoted as having said to the Barristers Club at San Francisco, quote, "I hope you will take your guns and shoot judges and police." The Washington Post, which is a liberal newspaper, describing the Black Panther newspaper as published here just a month or so after the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, which ran a drawing of Kennedy as a dead pig, photos of his Negro bodyguards described as, quotes, LBJ bootlickers, and a flattering portrait of Sirhan. Now, it doesn't surprise you that this should attract public notice, does it?
No, because when we publish our paper, we hope that it will attract public notice. And the reason we first put the paper out in the first place because we knew that people were interested in that.
Yeah.
So we're not surprised that that's true.
Well, what in the ideal society are the consequences, or ought to be the consequences, of such an attitude as you take?
Well, in an ideal society, my attitude would be unnecessary. See, an ideal society, I suppose,
Where all the pigs would be dead.
all the pigs would be extinct.
Yeah.
People would no longer be in a position to function in a pig-like manner.
So therefore, the ideal society is merely one in which your ideals dominate, even if it requires the
I don't think that would
extinction.
be accurate. I think that an ideal society would be one in which all people would have a chance to bring their ideas to bear on the social process,
Yeah.
and not to be subjected to the dictation of any particular person or any particular clique of people.
But now, as I understand it, you have been rather impatient with people who fancy themselves as struggling to help the cause of the black people. I see that you recently said about Julian Bond that, quotes, he is becoming a pig and might just end up being barbecued with the rest of the pigs.
Yeah.
Suppose we start by discussing what it is about Julian Bond that makes you call him a pig.
Well, it's like this. Let me say this. There are always political differences within any group or with any particular spectrum of the political scene. Just as you yourself attack people and cut them up in your magazine and on your program, this is legitimate also in our part of the spectrum. The things that we feel are constructive, there are tactics and approaches that we feel are detrimental to the cause. We feel that Julian Bond, as a member of the Democratic Party, is part and parcel of the machinery of oppression. We feel that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are criminal conspiracies against the people. And we feel that anyone who affiliates with them, supports them, speaks good about them, writes good about them, are aiding and abetting this criminality.
Yeah. Now, how would you agree to test your position? That is to say, is there any test to which you would be willing to submit it on the basis of which you might conclude that you were mistaken? For instance,
I'm not concerned about any laboratory tests. My position is being tested daily in the real world, and that's all I'm concerned about. Where the action is, it's being tested on the University of California campus. It's being tested in the black communities throughout this country, and it's not my individual position. It's the position of the Black Panther Party, and my position, the Black Panther Party position, one and the same.
yeah, now, yes, I understand that. The question I'm raising is, if you say that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are engaged in criminal conspiracies to deny you and how many Black Panthers are there? 200, 300?
4 or 5.
4 or 5, yeah. To deny them their rights. Would you be willing to change your position if an election were held, the result of which was a very substantial repudiation of your views by the people who are engaged in this conspiracy? In other words, how can we ever find out whether you're right or wrong, or is it simply a religious feeling that you have, which is not susceptible?
The same way that we
to
find out
verification?
whether the John Birch Society or the Minutemen or the mad right wing of the Republican Party is right or wrong. We see who will be victorious in the end.
When is the end? You're talking about a millennium from now?
If the Black Panther Party is totally repudiated by the community and it becomes extinct, then we will say that there was nothing in the community to nurture its growth. And the same thing would apply to any other particular political tendency. At the present time, the Black Panther Party is growing. We have branches all over the country, and we feel that we have more work than we could possibly do. And for the foreseeable future, it looks like it's going to be more of that.
I see. So therefore, you would concede that if the Black Panther movement did not grow, this would mean that it was mistaken in its premises?
Well, I'm saying that if the Black Panther Party, having had its program aired in the community, ceased to exist, this would indicate to me that the people were not willing to support it.
Yes, but the fact that people aren't willing to support it doesn't mean that it's not a good idea, does it? Or are you making that act of faith in the democratic process?
In the sense to see a good political idea, I would say would be one that was functional and one that could help the people and that the people would relate to, and the people would help to spread it and become part of it. A good political idea in a book somewhere on some shelf would seem to me to be non-functional.
Well, I'm anxious, Mr. Cleaver, for you to elaborate on your ideas. And suppose that Julian Bond were in the room at this moment, wouldn't he, in all likelihood, say, but don't you understand, I am working within the Democratic Party, I have a considerable leverage within the Democratic Party, I have addressed as many as 50 million people at one time via the Democratic Party. What's wrong with that? How would you reply to him?
Well, if he would say that, what I would do is talk about the Democratic Party, its the various units, its history, and the fact that it's one of the chief instruments of oppression of the people. The Democratic Party is a national entity. It's composed of local units. It's infested with vicious racists, people who disenfranchise black people, who manipulate the political process, and who are in fact in power because they have usurped the political process. And the local units, you may have a unit in some part of the country that is not involved in any oppression of black people because there are no black people in that particular area. But they add their strength to the national organization, and this means essentially that they will be adding their strength to the racists from both the North and the South who are actively involved in perpetrating laws that oppress the people and practices that oppress the people and carrying out criminal wars of genocide against the Vietnamese people and constituting the bulwark of imperialism and oppression all over the world. So I don't think that Julian Bond would be justified in supporting that, and he wouldn't have very much to say to me because he knows I don't want to hear it.
Well, how about Dick Gregory? Is he a pig, too?
Dick Gregory, he's all right.
He's all right.
He's
Well,
a comedian.
But he's very enthusiastic about Julian Bond. Is he nevertheless all right?
Dick Gregory's all right with me.
Uh-huh. Well, now, he's very much against the war, so is Julian Bond against the war. Now, Dick Gregory ran for mayor of Chicago a couple of years ago. Do you think he should not have run?
He ran for something in New York. Did you run for the mayor?
Yeah.
Same bag.
A lot of pigs beating him.
Some pigs run faster than others.
Now, was Dick Gregory mistaken in attempting to what is this term you use, usurping the political process? What does that mean?
That means that there's supposed to be representative democracy in this country. It's designed and calculated so that everyone in this country can have his will involved in all decisions in that process. And that there's gerrymandering going on in this country. There's intimidation of people. There's been outright murder of people who attempted to express the will of black people. And that's what it means to me. People who have illegally and against the interests of their constituents moved to manipulate the political process for their own interests.
But you see, the trouble with your analysis is that you are always attempting to define the interests of the constituency instead of letting the constituency do it for itself. In point of fact, Dick Gregory was...
constituency, you see?
Well, yes, but you're only one part of it, aren't you?
One part of it.
Other people count, too.
There's no one who can say that any individual doesn't have the right to speak out and offer any definition that he's capable of coming up with. And this is one of the things that I'm very much opposed to, that the power structure, the pigs of the power structure, seek to eliminate various people from the political process through various means, make them believe that they have no right to participate in it or to speak out or to define issues as they see them. I say that a wino stumbling down the street to Sacramento in front of the Capitol has just as much right as you or Richard Milhouse Nixon to express his political opinions and to offer definitions.
So what?
So that, I mean, you're saying...
Who's disputing that?
You just got through disputing.
No. I'm just...
You just got through saying that I'm one individual and therefore there's something wrong with me offering these definitions.
No. What I'm saying is that you don't seem to be willing to grant precisely that freedom which you theoretically cherish of people to decide their own political future. When Dick Gregory ran for mayor of New York, 2% of the black community there voted for him. 98% voted for another candidate. Now, wouldn't this suggest a rather overwhelming repudiation of the point of view of Dick Gregory by people he nevertheless understands himself to be serving?
It would indicate to me that the people who did participate in that election are in vast need of some political education.
Yeah, that's what I thought you'd get around saying. Yeah. In other words, people will be voting correctly when they vote as you tell them to, or as you educate them to.
When they begin to vote in their own interest, when they vote in such a manner as to destroy Dawson's machine in Chicago and to destroy Daley's machine in Chicago, then they will be functioning in their best interest because Dawson and Daley are part and parcel of the oppression that those people are suffering. So as long as they support Dawson in office and Daley in office, I can say that they're functioning in a politically wise manner.
No, again, let's however understand the consequences of what you have said, which is that until people get around to voting in their interest as defined by you, they are voting wrongly and are, quote, usurping the political process. I think it's important we say that because I have found in your literature...
I think it's important we make a distinction because it's not a case of me standing up and making definitions and calling on everyone else to coincide with my definitions. This is a matter of a tradition of struggle against a system of oppression. It's a matter of a heritage and perpetuating a heritage of struggle. And there is some consensus involved in that, and it's not contributed by any one particular person.
Well, no, I suppose you admit a few people into your deliberations, but nevertheless, they continue to be a very, very small minority, and I therefore must stand by my point, which is a sort of that there is the Marcusean edge to your thought, that people don't vote for their own best interests because they are constantly deceived, and that only a revolutionary experience will cause
I
them.
don't think there's any doubt that people are deceived. You have the pigs of the mass media who manipulate information. They distort statistics. They distort reports. Essentially, they distort reality so that people have their heads filled with lying and vicious propaganda, and they're in no position to really function in a realistic manner.
Well, now, why are you uniquely situated to have penetrated to this great national delusion? Why isn't Julian Bond as bright as you, and as morally concerned as you, and as penetrating as you? Well, what happened to Bond that corrupted his vision?
I'm not making any of the claims that you're attributing to me.
Well, there must be some reason for your vision, isn't there?
I don't claim to have any vision. See,
well, but you do.
This is what you're saying. So if you're saying this means you've made the assessment. So you tell me what you see in me that makes you draw that conclusion.
Well, I've read your book, and I see how you handle people who disagree with you. They're pigs, they're murderers, they're Nazi-like, they're everything.
Who disagree with me don't fall in that category. I have disagreements.
No, but everybody
with
from
people
Bond to
within
Reagan.
The Black Panther Party, and I don't call them pigs. I just say that they're mistaken, or I disagree with them.
All right.
But we define the pigs as those who are actively involved in the machinery of oppression. Three categories of evil: the avaricious businessmen, demagogic politicians, and the racist pig cops. These are the pigs of the power structure. And Julian Bond wouldn't fall in that particular category. He would fall in the category of all the other black Democrats who are involved in that. They're lackeys from the colony, helping the oppressors from the mother country carry out their oppression.
Now, would you argue that any effort of the kind made by, say, Whitney Young, or Julian Bond, or Martin Luther King, or anybody to affect a reconciliation between the races is a waste of time, or is it also another enterprise in corruption because it retards the true revolutionary posture that you're seeking to cultivate?
I think that essentially what it does is it helps to create a blind and violent situation. In fact, it has helped to create the situation that we're in today, because these men go behind closed doors with the businessmen and the politicians of the power structure, and they propose certain programs, and they force these programs off as being capable of silencing the dissent in the black community. And they don't work, and so that when the people move to rebel, it's directly a result of the failure of leadership to offer valid solutions.
Well, Martin Luther King advocated 3 specific pieces of national legislation, all of which were enacted into law. So if he were here, mightn't he say that, in fact, his agitation did help?
Well, he was here, you see, and he was agitating, and he had a particular approach to the situation, namely nonviolence, and he died by violence at the hands of an assassin, you see, someone who opposed his program very actively.
Did you publish a prettified picture of his assassin as well as the assassin of Bobby Kennedy?
What kind of picture?
Prettified.
Prettified. No, we didn't publish a prettified picture of Martin Luther King. We don't consider Martin Luther King to be one of the pigs of the power structure. He was moving against the power structure in a manner that we feel was not calculated to bring the power structure down.
Why?
Well, because essentially it helped to strengthen the power structure.
Why?
Because it functioned within the channels that the power structure can deal with.
In other words, anything that doesn't actually require a dissolution of the power structure is simply a form of perpetuation of tyranny?
Well, it's helping it to function, because Martin Luther King, when he first started his nonviolent tactics, they were new to the American scene, and because they were new, the pigs didn't really know how to deal with them, so that some gain could be made. But after repetition of this process over the months and over the years, the pigs had programmed it so that they were perfectly capable of containing it and limiting its effect.
For instance, where?
Where? All over the South.
Can you give me an example?
Pardon?
Can you give me an example?
Well, we could give you an example of his Poor People's Campaign. Poor People's March in Washington. It was a total failure. Didn't bring down the power structure, and it resulted in a humiliating defeat for his forces, you see.
No, but the Poor People's Campaign was not similar to the techniques used in Montgomery, Alabama, successfully.
Yes, but it was the same principle involved. The masses of people moving against the system, but moving nonviolently and led by a Pied Piper who would sing sweet songs to the mother country. That's all.
Mr. Cleaver, I know some leaders of the Negro movement who believe that you have set that movement back more than any man in the last 10 years as a result precisely of feeding stereotypes of which white racists, in fact, do encourage. That is to say, that your particular virulent brand of hate everybody is encouraging people who may be looking for the excuse to think of you as typical of their race. And they are most anxious, and in fact, in one particular case, most anxious that they be dissociated from you. Now, do you automatically assume that they are mouthing sentiments of that kind simply to ingratiate themselves with the power establishment? Or do you credit their sincerity?
Knowing what you represent, you see, knowing what point you represent on the political spectrum, if you have some Negro friends in the movement, Negro leaders who are your friends, then I could understand why they would be hostile to me. Because,
well, Dick Gregory's a friend of mine.
It's the Negro, see, the Negro movement, they say that I would set it back 10 years. It's my desire to eliminate it totally, because I'm involved in the movement of black people who repudiate everything about this system because it has been oppressing them. And anyone who would sit down and criticize that and call themselves the leaders of the Negro movement and confide to you that I'm doing all these bad things, well, I couldn't have any beef for them at all.
No, I shouldn't think that it would be logical if you would, but I said no, Dick Gregory did not tell me that.
Can you
I simply
name
said he's a friend of mine. Yeah.
Who are the Negro leaders who told you that? I'd like to talk to them about that.
You might barbecue them, so I certainly won't release their name. I didn't ask you to assess their evaluation. I know that ahead of time. I'm asking you whether you doubt their sincerity.
I doubt their existence.
Yeah, well, then it makes it much easier to see how you come by your data if you doubt the existence of Negro leaders who despise you. Because in fact they abound.
Despise me,
certainly,
and bring their
anybody
to you.
And anybody who believes that rights ought to be had by everyone, even people who disagree with you, would have to despise your position. Anybody who, for instance, thought that an appropriate thing to do after Bobby Kennedy was assassinated was not to run a picture of him looking like a pig would despise you. And that means quite a lot of people, you know. Bobby Kennedy had a considerable following in this country.
Bobby Kennedy was a pig, you see.
Yeah, I know.
Bobby Kennedy was part and parcel of the machinery of oppression of this country, and simply because he was assassinated, it doesn't change that, you see.
Now, you say you have 4 or 5 100 Panthers, which would suggest that your movement, even though you believe it to be an incandescent one...
You said 400 or 500.
Oh, I said 200 or 300. You said 400 or 500 a moment ago.
Just notice 1, 2, 3. That's 3, 4 or 5 individuals.
Have you got a quorum?
Is that a quorum? I think we can hold our quorum down.
My question was, is it likely that a year from now, or isn't it likely that a year from now, your movement will simply become one of those blips in footnotes of history books about the lengths to which California is prepared to go? Aren't you, in fact, a creature of the University of California?
No, I wouldn't say that's likely.
Well,
I don't see that.
this is what brought you to a lot of people's attention, the fact that you feature in a power contest between the regents and the student body.
I was trying to the first part of your question. You said, isn't it likely that a year from now you'll become one of these bleats in the footnotes? I think that that's not true. I don't think that's likely.
Well, it is. It surely is likely, if only because the logic of your own analysis is that America, which is, quotes, a Nazi country, will move ruthlessly against anybody that really and truly challenges it, right?
That doesn't mean that it would be successful in destroying all the people who move against it, because there are millions and millions of people, whole nations of people all around the world.
But they all vote for Mayor Daley. We just traversed that ground, didn't
The
we?
people that I'm talking about did not vote for Mayor Daley, and some of the people who voted for him this time around might possibly be shooting at him next time around.
Well, they voted for Julian Bond. Where are these million people hidden?
I don't think they're hidden. You see?
Well, why don't
some of them may be right out here? You know,
Yeah, we're
some
talking
of
about
them
millions.
are all over this country.
No, I don't doubt that one at least
The
is
millions
here.
and millions of black people in this country are becoming united. They're becoming unified, and they're not worshiping at the shrine of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and they're seeking an alternative, and there are people actively involved in preparing that alternative for them. And I think that it will be prepared, it will be presented, and it will be successful in joining with allied forces both in the white community here and around the world to destroy
that's
it.
an act of faith. I used to hear George Lincoln Rockwell saying the kind
Yeah,
of
you
thing.
probably
same
heard a
kind
lot of
thing.
people say things like that, you see.
And most
But,
of them
that's
have
still gonna happen.
mercifully passed from the scene, at least as potent figures. But what makes your own brand of your own ideology, I suppose, especially interesting, is that you are obviously a very competent man.
What do you see in our ideology that's so objectionable? You think it's wrong for people to want to kill their oppressors?
Well, I think that what's primarily at fault with it is that it fails to recognize, A, the human condition, B, how valiantly a lot of people work and have worked over a period not merely of months but of generations, back when you were raping people, in order to try to effect
I didn't rape for a
reconciliation.
generation. I raped for 2 or 3 months.
Well, yeah. Let's say perhaps some of your victims considered it a generation, and that these people have been diligently working to try to construct a better order. Here you come with a blowtorch, calling people like Bobby Kennedy and Julian Bond pigs, and it seems to me that to approach with that kind of rhetorical edge a tender situation is to do it very obviously a spectacular disservice.
Well, I think that that's incorrect. People struggle, they contribute what they can, and when they can no longer cope with the situation, I don't think that people are bound to carry on their tactics just because they were active for all these years. There have been all kinds of people coming in and offering their efforts, and when they finish that, they pass from the scene. And that's all they have coming. They don't have the right to expect other people to stop the movement and not go forward simply because there's a need for a change of tactics.
No, there's always a need for a change of tactics, or at least for refreshing oneself concerning the necessity of new tactics. For instance, in New York, there are a lot of people, I think, who nowadays saying what only the right wing was saying a while ago, which is that the labor unions effectively block black people from entering the construction trade unions. There are those who are calling for black capitalism. There are those who have enough faith in the Negro people to subscribe to the doctrines of Nathan Glazer and Patrick Moynihan that they must be given a chance to exercise black power. Now, all of that is in motion, and many of these tactics are new, and many discoveries are being made which directly benefit people in very concrete ways: education, jobs, housing, medicine, and the rest of it. But you simply want to reject the whole of it as pig hypocrisy.
Yeah, I think that it is hypocrisy. I don't see any prospect of these people who, on the one hand, are willing to drop bombs on the Vietnamese people who are struggling to control their country, and then coming here with their wars on poverty, trying to turn black people into black capitalists, when in fact it's the capitalistic system itself that has to be destroyed, because it is the mother of all this oppression. The same situation that your people found themselves in when they came here, and that other ethnic groups have found themselves in, we find ourselves in that position. Plus we find the descendants of those ethnic groups that first came here now part of the power structure and actively involved in oppressing us. And they've united against us. They've closed the doors to the melting pot against us. And so we can't do anything but step back.
I don't understand why you say that, because it seems to be
because it's true,
clearly not
because
the case,
history shows it is true.
It seems to be clearly not the case. Look at Julian Barlow. Look at the daughter of Dean Rusk.
Well, look at Machine Gun Kelly, and look at Al Capone.
All right. Well,
and look at the Molly Maguires, and look at Sacco and Vanzetti.
Sure.
And look at the Irish people when they came over here and what they had to go through at the hands of Anglo-Saxons, and how they had to struggle.
Everybody has to go through everything.
And how they had to struggle, and they resorted to violence, and they moved up the power structure. And here you are now talking over TV justifying all that.
They didn't do so by the use of violence. The Jewish people in New York did not use violence in order to certain. No,
every ethnic group that ever came here used violence.
Well, this is a historical generality which could be said about everybody. What has the white structure done to impede progress in Liberia?
Created Liberia.
Well, but this was the Black Power call of 100 years ago, isn't it?
This Liberia is owned and controlled by Firestone, and we all know that. It's nothing but a plantation, and the people there are
Why have they
slaves
permitted
of
it,
America.
the Liberians?
Why they permitted it?
Yeah.
Permitted it for the same reason that I'm tolerating this shit right now, because they have guns, and they have planes, and they have bombs, and they force people, and they find bootlickers and Uncle Toms to perpetuate their game. And the people don't endorse it. And when they find a means of organizing against it, they're going to run Firestone out of there and take control of that country.
Well, now, how do you account for the workings of the power structure in the Soviet Union, since that's not a capitalist society?
Isn't it?
No. Oh, it is a capitalist society, is it?
That's what I read in the capitalist press. They say that they're cementing relationships with the Soviet Union. The premier of the Soviet Union sent a message of congratulations to this racist pig Nixon when he was elected. I would say that they're chummy-chummy and buddy-buddy, and that's unfortunate.
Lots. A question here from this hearing.
Mr. Buckley, when you
A little louder, please.
when you opened with your address, you stated that Eldridge Cleaver's following consisted largely of that of dissatisfied whites. And I'd like to know what led you to this conclusion. It would seem to me that you're saying that Eldridge is just possibly not a leader of black people.
Oh, I say it emphatically. I don't think he's leader of all black people.
And why is that?
Well, because his notions are so absurd, that's why, and black people are not absurd.
But it stands, from looking at the black community, that most people support what Eldridge Cleaver said.
On the contrary, if you think that, you don't know anything.
But I live
I
in the
gave you
black
as an example.
community,
I gave you as an example
and
of
I'm
Dick
aware.
Gregory. I gave you as an example that Dick Gregory ran for mayor of New York and or Chicago and got only 2.5 to 3% of the Negro vote on a program far less virulent than Mr. Cleaver's. If he had went on that program, he probably wouldn't have gotten 3 votes.
But that you're comparing the difference between two different people. Dick Gregory is one person, and Eldridge Cleaver
Yes,
is
and Dick
another.
Gregory has a much larger following than Mr. Cleaver.
Well, see, sister, you have to realize this, that it's been traditional. The white men have been able to tell us what's going on with us, and we don't know.
That's right.
You don't know.
That's right.
You sure don't know, and you're certainly proving it.
But how can you make an assumption that we don't know when we are
Well,
the people
for
who
one thing, I
live
read the
within
press.
that community?
I read the press, and...
But the press is not an accurate account of what goes
now,
on
wait a
in the
minute.
black
Look,
community.
if I pick up a newspaper, the newspaper says, Mr. Cleaver addressed a group of 1,000 people today, of whom approximately 85% were white. Should I dispute that? What is the press trying to put over on me by saying that? Because obviously it's rather embarrassing to white people to have that many people present at a lecture of Mr. Cleaver. It would be like attending a Nazi rally.
I don't think that, that's the issue, because, like, how can you regard what the press says as completely true?
I don't.
But you're basing your conclusion that most of Mr. Cleaver's following is dissatisfied whites.
No, because there is a correlation between internal plausibility and what the press says. If the press says, and what's more, Mr. Cleaver got the biggest hand when he set Buckley for president, I would doubt the press. But since there wasn't anything that outrageous said, I see no reason to suppose that that reporter has designs on my gullibility.
Well, had it ever occurred to you that, for instance, when Eldridge gives a speech somewhere, you take into the account how many black people can come to those speeches. They are usually during working hours, and most black people just don't have time. They're too busy making their living to take off from work to go to hear his speeches. So therefore, what you have is a lot of white people who have that time, who can come and listen to Eldridge. And that would account for the large number of white people in the audience.
They had plenty of time to listen to Martin Luther King, to listen to Julian Bond, and to listen to even Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., so I think that's sort of a phony excuse.
No, it's not, because if you take into account Martin Luther King, most of his speeches were given in churches at nighttime when people were off from work and could come to his speeches.
Mr. Edwards, do you have a question?
Well, yes, I think one thing, I'm afraid there's a fair amount of distortion going on. I'd like to ask Mr. Cleaver to talk about some of the goals of the Panther movement. And since I assume, perhaps Mr. Cleaver won't agree, that there has to be some sort of structure in the long run, I would like to ask him what he envisions the structure to be after the revolution.
Well, if revolution would be successful in this country, first of all, I would envision a complete absence of the capitalistic mode of doing things. I mean, the profit motive, turning the resources of the earth into private property so that individuals and cliques of individuals can derive the benefit from the production, while the people who are really the backbone of production come off short. And millions of people are left completely out of the process altogether. We want to eliminate that system, and for it, substitute one that will be based on the principles of socialism that would recognize the true condition of the planet, that all of us come here the same way. We come here naked. We don't come here with deeds of trust and blue chip stock in our hands. We come here naked on an equal basis, and we have therefore an equal right to access to all of the things that we need in order to survive on this planet. So that we want a system that recognizes that and that is structured in a manner that this can be produced and provided for the people.
Is there any system in the world right now that you could point to and say this is much more what we want?
I think that all of the countries that are moved into socialism and that are trying to construct a socialistic system are far superior in its essence to this decadent system that we live under here. And I would not exclude any of them, even the ones who would compose the right wing of the socialist movement around the world. I would say that they have at least taken a step to enact basic principles of socialism. And I would say that's better and far more acceptable than this gangsterism that's going on here.
Ms. McInerney?
Yes, to get back to the question of your following, Mr. Cleaver, in the white community. In your book, Soul on Ice, you mentioned that for the first time the black community could respect a group of white people, and this being the white student liberals, the upper middle class students who are rejecting their value structure, the ones they were brought up under. Now, is the respect that you're gaining from this community something that you are working for? Are you valuing it? Are you trying to build up a constituency of mere numbers from this
I'm not trying to build up a constituency. I'm trying to work with people, whoever they might be, who are sincerely interested and who show signs of breaking with the heritage of this country, and who realize that white supremacy, the domination of white people over the other people of the world has come to an end, that the people of the world are no longer going to accept it, and they're looking for ways of getting out of that. And when I see people who are struggling to do a good job and to change things, I lean over backwards to work with them. And this is the reason that I participate in activities or make speeches in the white community, because I find that there are great numbers of young white people who feel about the situation the same way I feel. They want it to end, and we're willing to talk to them and have a dialogue to try to come up with some solutions to this problem.
Don't you really think that they're patronizing you, Mr. Cleaver? Because I really do. In other words, things are worse in one respect than you feel.
You say they're patronizing me? Or
yeah, they're patronizing you. They think,
here's
exciting?
A member of my class right here.
Yeah.
This is Debbie. There are a couple more members here, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 back there. And I don't get the impression that either I'm patronizing them or that they're patronizing me.
Well, I wasn't asking about your impression. I'm giving you mine, which is that they are patronizing you.
Sure.
And the reason they're patronizing you is because they think it's so daring to get out and listen to somebody who speaks this kind of thing. I have no doubt at all. You see what I mean? You see what I mean?
See, I think that's an insult to the intelligence of these people. You see?
Oh, no, as a matter of fact, a lot of intelligent people consider this simply a sensation. And I have absolutely no doubt that when Hitler's following was no larger than yours, there were people who considered him a very considerable moral theorist and so on.
I think that
and the more people
that you're following the people in the Republican Party who worship you and who read your disgusting magazine, the National Review. I think that they're the ones who are alienated from reality. I read some of your stuff this morning, you know, and well, it seems to me that it's criminal, and I think that that's far more worse than rape. I think that you're raping the minds of the American people, and I think you're raping the future, and you're murdering the future, and everything that the Republican Party is involved in, and everything in the National Review, I think is detrimental to the people of this country.
This is music to my ears, Mr. Cleaver. There's no higher ambition I have than to be represent exactly the opposite of what you represent.
I'm glad to be of service.
And I think I've achieved it. I know that.
Sure.
But as I say, I do think that you have a special brief against certain white liberals who do patronize you. They think, look, how I'm associating with a great big live radical. He calls Bobby Kennedy pig. Whee, isn't that exciting? He called Bobby Kennedy, and he utters obscenities in front of 2,000-3,000 people, and whee, isn't that exciting? There's a lot of childishness in it. I have no doubt that they will grow up, and I have no doubt that maybe you will too. But meanwhile, well, let's assume that that's a universal act of faith.
Yes, a universal act of repudiation of what you're spouting now.
No, I don't doubt.
We're going to cut that out.
Cut that out. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, you be sure and watch that and see how we cut that out, right? And all of the other eloquent things you said. Yeah. Oh, excuse me, we have another question here, Mr. Barry.
Mr. Cleaver, getting toward the Black Panther Party platform, it espouses in the final point, humanity, peace, freedom. Point 4 states all black men should be exempt from the draft. I'm wondering if you would mind commenting on that, what your rationale behind that is.
We feel that there's a glaring contradiction involved in black men responding to a call issued by a pig like General Hersey, who had the audacity to endorse George Wallace for president, if you recall. General Hersey is
I don't recall, as a matter of fact.
Excuse me, can I ask the man's question?
Yeah, well, you said if you recall. Do you recall that?
I don't.
Does
anybody recall that? Yes, you did? Well, because they were crooked. I was just instructed not to. Yeah, go ahead.
The National Review didn't support George Wallace. But General Hersey, you see, is head of the Selective Service System. And he's the one who sends out these greetings to these young black brothers. And what I'm saying is this, that this country is a racist country. It's oppressing black people, and it's the enemy of black people, the system. And that black people should be here in this country fighting against this system, and not over in Vietnam fighting against the Vietnamese people who are also fighting the system. I say that what they're doing, the black men who go over there and fight, they're helping to tighten the yoke around their own necks and around the necks of their people. So that I don't think that any man should belong to an army or fight for a country that's destroying him and his people.
You were saying, Mr. Cleaver?
I say that contrary to the propaganda of the pigs of the power structure, the Black Panther Party is a responsible organization, not responsible to the pigs, but responsible to the people. That it was organized by our Minister of Defense, Huey P. Newton, and our Chairman, Bobby Seale, and has a program and a platform designed to cope with the problems facing black people in the black community. It's not a racist organization. I've been called by the National Review the Goebbels of the Black Liberation Party, of the Black Panther Party. And all of this is an attempt to undermine the party or to give it a bad presentation to the public.
That's right.
And I say this, that the people in the area who have bothered to check out the party, I'm talking about white people, Mexican-American people, American Indians, Chinese people, they've checked this out, they've contrasted us with other organizations, and they enthusiastically support us and associate with us. And we're very glad to be able to do that because we feel that we are making a constructive effort and that our program is designed to do something for the black people. And we feel that black people will support it and that the party will be able to make a significant contribution to progress and to the liberation of all people, including black people.
Ms. Hearing has another question.
Eldridge, I would like you to ask Mr. Buckley if he can explain the format of the Molly Guire, incident, that Irish group that was formed in 1877 against the English.
Under ordinary circumstances, I think that that would be a good question to put to one of the descendants of the Molly Maguires, you see.
Mm-hmm.
But this particular one, I would be reluctant to put any question to him because I'm quite sure that he's capable of twisting it in such a manner as to turn it against you or to turn it against whoever asks the question.
So
Mr. Buckley
am I to proceed as though I was not
smart
asked? Do you have the question, Mr. Edwards? We have only a minute left.
Well, yes, I do, but it might take more than a minute. I guess it can't. In the University of California, Mr. Cleaver, there's been quite a hassle there over recent months. You talked earlier about the press not representing it, and yet it seems all over the nation that they're objecting. The reason the students are supporting the university and the conflict is because you're lecturing. Do you think this is the case, or is it because of the way they tried to keep you from lecturing?
I think that the students in this country, on the campuses all over this country, recognize that those who are in power in this country are in position to take control of the universities. They sit on the boards of regents, on the administrations, and they have turned the universities into weapons in the war, the Cold War, or into the struggle against their enemies. And they're programming these people in a manner that they don't appreciate, and they're moving to get some student power so they could have something to say about